Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about this. We didn't expect to have a crowd this big, so I'm afraid we cannot provide chairs for the students at the back. So we'd appreciate if you could just stand up there and participate in the forum as much as you can. We are going to start now. Oh, there are some chairs coming. Okay, so please do wait. Okay. So good evening, everyone. My name is Alma Salvador, Associate Professor of Political Science, and I'm here to stand as your MC to the 4th Ambassador Rodolfo C. Severino Memorial Lecture, which is an important part of the Department of Political Science plenary talks and in collaboration with the Department of Economics. Both are departments under the Dr. Rosita G. Leong School of Social Sciences here at Ateneo de Manila University. To officially open our event, let us stand for the Philippine National Anthem.
Magiliw, pelas ang sinanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupig, di ka pa sisingin. Sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bukaw, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagdiningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng luwalhati pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang hinigaya na pag may mga api, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Opening prayer, let us pause for a moment of reflection. We gather today with open hearts and minds, seeking understanding in the face of global challenges. Grant us the courage to engage in dialogue that fosters peace, the wisdom to discern the path of justice, and the generosity to serve without seeking reward. Teach us to labor not for our gain, but for the good of our communities and nations. Tonight, our discussions inspire solutions that uphold dignity, fairness, and the common good. In the spirit of St. Ignatius de Loyola, may we give without counting the cost, strive for truth without fear, and work for a future shaped by compassion and responsibility. Amen. Take a seat, please. I am honored to introduce the Dean of Dr. Rosita G. Leong School of Social Sciences, Dr. Zarina Bopip Saloma Akpedenu, to deliver the opening remarks. Dean Bopip.
Ambassador Antonio Basilio, Director of the Carlos P. Romulo Foundation for Peace and Development. Howie is here. Mr. Howie Severino, journalist and member of the Severino family. Dr. Alma Salvador, holder of the Ambassador Rodolfo C. Severino Jr. Professorial Chair in Diplomacy and International Relations. Father Norberto Bautista, Director of the Office of University Development and Alumni Affairs. Guests, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I welcome you warmly to this year's Ambassador Rodolfo Severino Lecture with lectures by Assistant Secretary Jose Victor Chan-Gonzaga, Office of American Affairs, Department of Foreign Affairs, Assistant Secretary Levinson C. Alcantara, Assistant Secretary for Pre-Employment Services and for Management Information and Technology Service, Department of Migrant Workers, Dr. Chester Cabalza, Founding President, International Development and Security Cooperation, and Dr. Geoffrey Ducanes, Associate Professor of our very own Department of Economics. The Severino Lecture, along with the Professorial Chair in Diplomacy and International Relations, is a program of the Ambassador Rodolfo Severino Jr. Endowment Fund for Diplomacy and International Relations. The inaugural Ambassador Lecture on the Code of Conduct on the South China Sea was delivered by the former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Albert Del Rosario, on the 26th of August 2021. So this is the fourth lecture. In the 1990s, the social sciences underwent a global turn with an explosion of interest in social dynamics beyond the borders of nation states. In the social sciences, a turn refers to a change of direction within a discipline which has important consequences for that discipline. So in the social sciences, we hear about the cultural turn, the practice turn, the planetary turn, and many, many turns, the ontological turn. The global turn was made more palpable and urgent by the need to respond to the growing interconnectedness of social processes across the planet. This is globalization. And over the past 30 years, we have learned concepts such as transnationality and also transtemporality, which highlights the importance of reckoning with historical precedents. And our elections is something like that needs that kind of reckoning. But there are those who say that the social sciences have not kept up with globalization or global events. The Ateneo de Manila University, Jesuit Filipino Catholic University, which is bent on serving the nation by, among others, there are 4 pillars of our engagements these days: bridging cultural divides, and this can be temporal, and this can be translocal divides, political, economic, which will be the topic of today's lectures. And so in the university and at the Dr. Rosita G. Leong School of Social Sciences, we are trying to address this keeping up with globalization and global developments with our transnational engagements, or ways of thinking and doing beyond the borders of the nation state. And I have always highlighted to our students, reminded our students, that if we go out of the country, it is only first and foremost to understand the country better. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, we affirm that the central role of the social sciences and the university is to contextualize the universal. There are, human evolution, societal evolution is of universal interest, but context matters. That the Philippine context, for example. So this afternoon, with the Department of Political Science of the School of Social Sciences, Dr. Rosita G. Leong, which houses the Political Science and the Diplomacy and International Relations program, we will demonstrate that we have developed a global perspective, that we have reoriented ourselves to a new level of aggregation, but at the same time, we know how to contextualize. As we seek to learn about the impact of global developments of the 2025 Philippine elections and vice versa. After all, it is through the local that the global works. I hope that the short time that we will have this afternoon will provide an excellent opportunity to learn from one another. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Bo Pipa. Let us welcome Dr. Carmel Melay Abao, Chair of the Department of Political Science, to provide the context for today's discussion. Dr. Melay.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Okay. Preparing for this forum, we asked, how are global shifts shaping our national politics? And more importantly, how can universities like ours contribute to making these global issues part of voter education and electoral discourse, given that the May 2025 elections is just around the corner? We are now witnessing profound changes in the global political landscape. The reemergence of authoritarianism, right-wing movements, and democratic backsliding. These shifts do not stop at national borders. They influence governance, economic policies, and social movements worldwide, including in the Philippines. The topics for today's discussion were chosen because they highlight how global political shifts, notably the transition to a new U.S. administration, directly and physically affect the Philippines. One, people-to-people ties. The U.S. is a key destination for overseas Filipino workers, Filipino students, and professionals. Changes in migration and labor mobility policies will affect job opportunities, visa access, and educational exchanges, impacting thousands of Filipino families. Two, security and defense. As the Philippines navigates territorial disputes and regional tensions, shifts in U.S. foreign policy could reshape military cooperation, alliances, and overall stability of the Indo-Pacific region, influencing our national security strategy. Three, trade and investment. The U.S. remains a significant economic partner. Adjustments in trade policies, whether in tariffs, market access, or investment regulations, could create new opportunities or challenges for Philippine industries, affecting jobs and economic growth. How these developments have affected the decisions and actions of the first half of the Marcos administration is a matter of examination and analysis. To our very able resource persons today, we hope to shed light on that. We also hope to start the conversation on how these developments can inform the 2025 elections. The Senate and Congress elections, for one, will be crucial since the legislature plays a very major role in determining our country's national interest, especially where foreign policy is concerned. Yet, Philippine elections tend to be highly polarized, focused on personalities rather than policies, and global issues rarely make it into mainstream discourse. This is where universities must step in to bridge the gap between international trends and voter education, ensuring that the electorate understands the larger forces shaping our national trajectory. The Ateneo de Manila University fosters global awareness, informed civic engagement, and critical analysis to deepen electoral discourse beyond domestic politics. As we begin today's discussion, I invite you to think beyond the headlines, to explore not just how elections shape our future, but also how our engagement, our research, and discourse can shape elections. Let's ensure that global issues become part of electoral education so we can build a more informed and empowered electorate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abaw. So we will now begin with the presentations. Our first speaker, by the way, will be making a presentation virtually. Our first speaker will discuss how global shifts, particularly in U.S. foreign policy, will impact Philippine-U.S. people-to-people relations. Our speaker, Ambassador Jose Victor Chan-Gonzaga, is Assistant Secretary of the Office of American Affairs of the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs. He is a seasoned diplomat and career member of the Philippine Foreign Service, currently serving as Assistant Secretary for American Affairs. His key assignments include Consul General and Minister for Economic Affairs at the Philippine Embassy in Washington, D.C., Executive Director of the Department of Foreign Affairs Office of Legal Affairs and Sharjah Affairs ad interim at the Philippine Mission to the World Trade Organization in Geneva. Ambassador Chan-Gonzaga is also an Atenean. After holding a Master of Laws from Columbia University, he has had also a Juris Doctor from Ateneo de Manila School of Law, where he also earned his bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies. We will now have the Ambassador joining us on Zoom. A round of applause for the Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alma, and good evening, everyone. I hope coming in loud and clear. Please, can someone just let me know if there are any audio issues along the way as I deliver some remarks this afternoon. First of all, as Dr. Salvador said, I'm an Atenean, so I'm happy to be back in the Ateneo, albeit virtually this afternoon. And thank you also for the organizers, for the Department of Political Science and the Department of Economics of the Rosita Leong School of Social Sciences for inviting us to be part of this lecture series this afternoon. I apologize that I am not able to join you in person. As you know, the DFA is based in Pasay City. I just finished a meeting here a couple of minutes ago, and unless I flew in by helicopter, it would be virtually impossible with Manila's traffic to be there in person. So ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to deliver one of this year's 4 Ambassador Rodolfo C. Severino Memorial Lectures. Ambassador Severino was actually the chair of the Board of Foreign Service Examinations when I passed the FSO exams many years ago. He was an icon of the Philippine Foreign Service, and I wish I had the opportunity to work with him. Unfortunately, he retired from Philippine diplomacy not long after I joined the department in order to become the 10th Secretary General of the ASEAN. But indeed, thank you for this opportunity to honor Ambassador Severino's legacy and memory tonight. I hope you don't mind if, for obvious reasons, I sidestep some of the political and diplomatic landmines of the key themes of tonight's event. At the same time, however, I hope I can provide important context for the discussions that you will have with the speakers from the academe, who will hopefully be able to provide more candid and honest comments regarding aspects of Philippine-U.S. relations today. So let me begin. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, in a world where the only thing that appears to be constant is change, we are gratified by our enduring alliance, partnership, and friendship with the United States, especially towards advancing our common agenda of peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. In peace and in war, through natural disasters and pandemics, Philippine-U.S. relations have been firmly anchored on the values and principles we cherish: peace, democracy, fairness, social progress, and justice. Clearly, from where I sit today as the everyday manager of our bilateral relations with the United States, I firmly believe that the alliance is ironclad, our economic relations are extensive, and the friendship between our two peoples is unshakable. I am happy, therefore, that the organizers have assembled a diverse panel to speak about these aspects of Philippine-U.S. relations today. For my part, let me focus on the deep, historic, substantive, and long-standing friendship of the peoples of the Philippines and of the United States. During his visit to Washington, D.C. in the spring of 2023, President Marcos made 3 very important points. 1, our two countries and peoples are naturally drawn to each other, bound by our shared values and commitment to economic prosperity. 2, our bilateral partnership will continue to thrive if it works for our peoples. And 3, creating prosperity and realizing human potential will not only make the Philippines a more reliable alliance partner for the United States, but it will also strengthen our democracies. When we talk about the people-to-people ties between the Philippines and the United States, therefore, we do not do so only from the intuitive perspective of the communities of Filipinos and Americans living and or working in the United States and the Philippines, respectively. This is so because of the different, if not unique, experience of our two peoples. And here I speak of the experience of two nations whose friendship has been forged by the blood of our soldiers fighting together in war and by the values that our peoples share in times of peace. When we talk about Philippine-U.S. people-to-people ties today, it is in the context of the 4 million Americans of Filipino descent or ancestry, and of the nearly 700,000 Americans who now live in the Philippines. I would like to share with you 3 vignettes about those ties that hopefully provide us with a glimpse into the breadth, the depth, and the nature of the personal connections of Filipinos and Americans. The first is really Filipinos in the community. The contributions of Filipinos and Filipino Americans to American society, the U.S. economy, and the growth and development of the world's most consequential country cannot be understated. We find Filipinos in almost every sector of U.S. society and perhaps anywhere you go in the United States. As Ambassador Romualdez and I, when I was Consul General in Washington, D.C., used to say, Filipino Americans are our best ambassadors in the United States. And they are, through the work that they do each day in their communities, in their friendships, in their classrooms, in their hospitals. They are the most vital bridges between our two countries. But one area I want to highlight today is the healthcare sector. It is an experience that is most likely replicated in many other economic sectors with the same or varying degrees of consequence. Approximately 1 in 4 working Filipino adults in the U.S. today are frontline healthcare workers. The history of Filipino Americans in the U.S. healthcare system dates back to when the United States took control of the Philippines in 1898, established nursing schools to teach Western medicine in English, and soon filled the nursing shortage with Filipinos. In the 1960s, Filipino nurses in the States started to grow rapidly through the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 that made it easy for hospitals to hire Filipino nurses. Filipino immigrants represent the largest share at 28% of America's 512,000 immigrant registered nurses. Today, we contribute and excel in various medical specialties, including cardiology, oncology, and pediatrics. While Filipinos make up just 1% of the U.S. population, we account for over 4% of nurses practicing in the United States, making us the largest group of internationally educated nurses in the country. But in California, we make up nearly 18% of all the state's registered nurses. It was no surprise, therefore, that at the height of the COVID pandemic, a February 2021 report published by the National Nurses United reported that 83 out of 314 registered nurses who died from COVID-19 and related complications in the United States were Filipinos. That would have put it at 26.4% of all COVID-19 fatalities from the nursing profession. In 2023, a documentary film called Nurse Unseen, a powerful tribute to the Filipino nurses on America's front lines, directed, produced, and edited by Michelle Joshua, highlighted the role and the little-known history of Filipino nurses in the United States during the COVID-19 pandemic. And just this week, I think articles came out about how Pinoy nurses are finally taking center stage in medical dramas on U.S. television. The second vignette I want to share is the United States Peace Corps. The U.S. Peace Corps was established in 1961 by then President John F. Kennedy as America's paramount volunteer training program. It was envisioned to bring American skills to the grassroots, promoting peace and friendship through community-based development and intercultural understanding in more than 60 countries. In the 1970s, the Peace Corps Philippines concentrated on social and economic development in rural areas. Volunteers engaged in health and nutrition, water sanitation, agricultural extension, income generation, and local planning. From the mid-1980s to 1990, some volunteers worked as teacher trainers in high schools, while others focused on health, agriculture, fisheries, and community development. Since then, around 8,000 volunteers have served in the Philippines. At present, Peace Corps volunteers in the Philippines engage with various communities in 4 areas, namely education, children, youth and family, coastal resource management, and disaster management. The work of the Peace Corps was formally supplemented by the development work that we do with the United States. The United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, was a fixture of such work for many, many years. Of course, we all know from the news today that the Trump administration is rationalizing the work of USAID around the world. And the final vignette I want to share with you all tonight are the Philippine-U.S. exchange programs. There are various student exchange programs operating in the Philippines, including the Fulbright Program, the International Visitors Leadership Program, and the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative. The Fulbright Program is the premier foreign exchange scholarship program of the United States. Its mission is to promote bilateral research partnerships, cultural exchange, and the sharing of ideas between our two nations. The Philippine Fulbright Program is the longest continuously operating Fulbright program in the world. Established in 1948, the first batch of Filipino Fulbright scholars left for the United States a year later. The International Visitor Leadership Program, or the IVLP, is also an important exchange initiative of the U.S. Department of State, offering short-term visits to the U.S. for leaders in various fields to foster professional ties and strengthen foreign policy goals. Annually, nearly 5,000 visitors participate, with over 200,000 having engaged with Americans. I understand Howie Severino, Ambassador Severino's son, is one of the IVLP's alumni, as I'm sure many are too, perhaps, in the audience tonight. And finally, the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, or YSEALI, offers academic and professional fellowships where fellows undergo training in the U.S. in areas like civic judge engagement, innovation, natural resources, and governance. These exchanges are also replicated in military-to-military exchanges as well as with civil society. Friends, through education in the United States and the various volunteer and exchange programs, our two nations clearly strengthen our bilateral relations through fostering mutual understanding and educational and cultural exchange. Across the Pacific Ocean, we have Filipino immigrants, workers, and students in the United States, American Peace Corps volunteers in Aklan and Antique, Philippine and U.S. soldiers participating in Balikatan exercises, Filipino teachers in classrooms all across America, Pinoy grocery stores in the suburbs and rural areas and towns of the United States, and participants in a variety of exchange programs, all of whom have experienced much and even exchanged ideas more. They have learned from each other and they have worked together. These have been outstanding opportunities to impart new knowledge, train new leaders, and find new solutions to shared international concerns. For me, this is the beauty, the magic even of Philippine-U.S. bilateral relations. Whether we are saying farewell to friends who immigrate or reunite with families in the States, sending off scholars on their American adventures, welcoming Peace Corps volunteers, or meeting U.S. veterans who have relocated to our shores, in and with the work of friends and supporters of our bilateral ties, we reaffirm and strengthen the friendship between our two peoples. I hope that all of you here tonight realize that we can all be important partners in this regard. It is this impact of our work together with Filipinos overseas, and when matched with the totality of the experiences that will ever change the lives of overseas Filipinos and their families, the new learning and experience and expertise that they bring home, and the lifelong friendships that they create, that makes the diaspora experience invaluable. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we look around us closely today, we realize that Filipinos are currently engaged in multiple conversations. A conversation with ourselves as a people, a conversation with the United States, and even a conversation among Filipino Americans. Here in the Philippines, we have a national conversation that is cutting across politics, economic classes, age groups, educational achievements, and geographic locations. What will be the popular consensus or some new revised social contract after that conversation will be critical in shaping how we move forward as a people into the future. Over there in the United States, Filipino Americans are likewise engaged in conversation. They are trying to define themselves as a community. They are attempting to better understand the diaspora that now runs through various continuums of time, generations, experiences, and aspirations. They are trying to build a collective that is composed of very discrete individuals. They are raising children and second and third generations of Filipino Americans who see themselves and the world around them, including these islands across the Pacific, quite differently from the older generation who went ashore many summers ago in search of the American dream. On top of those two conversations, is our national conversation with the United States. The Philippines and the United States has always enjoyed a special, if unique, relationship. I think it is a testament to the strength of that relationship when you see how the bonds between our two peoples remain strong, even with the difficult conversation that our two countries have been engaged in during the last few years. These conversations are quite vital because we see the torch, so to speak, being slowly passed from one generation of Filipinos to another. From a generation who were forged on the fires of the post-World War II and Cold War years, to a generation of millennials who were born of an entirely different but no less difficult era. And so whether now or sometime later, we will all be called upon to be part of some or all of those conversations. And as we join these conversations, we need to remember that the friendship and the partnership between our governments and our peoples continue to be an unfinished project. Our task is to build upon the strong foundations of the past in order to achieve a common future of shared objectives and mutual prosperity. Each day, therefore, let us build upon the strong foundations of the past, and each day in the work of our two governments, in the contributions that Filipinos and Filipino Americans make to their communities in the United States, and in the collaboration with Americans who have made the Philippines their home, may the friendship between our two peoples be constantly reaffirmed and strengthened. And so, friends, ladies and gentlemen, for nearly 8 decades, the Philippines and the United States have remained friends, partners, and allies. This is an undeniable testament to the depth and quality of the bilateral and, most importantly, people-to-people relationship that goes beyond our defensive alliance and our economic partnership. So whether we gather as we do today to reflect on Philippine-U.S. relations, including the role of the Filipino diaspora in the U.S., or during joint military exercises, as we will see in a few weeks' time with Balikatan, there is no doubt that our relationship is robust, with our two countries continuing to work together to address common challenges. The Philippines and the United States remain committed to our long and enduring friendship, a friendship rooted in a shared history, strong democratic beliefs, common values, and the families and the people-to-people ties that embody the Philippine-U.S. relations across the Pacific Ocean. Thank you, and mabuhay po tayong lahat. Mabuhay ang bagong Pilipinas.
Ambassador Gonzaga. The ambassador would not be able to stay through the forum, so he can now take questions. One or two questions from the audience, please. Yes, please. Kindly approach the microphone, introduce yourself and your course, year and program. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Thaddeus Pedito from 2AB DepIR. Knowing the Philippines' warm relations and the current U.S. administration's tendency to favor the Philippines, do you think there would be more opportunities, or do you see it becoming easier for Filipinos and Philippine institutions such as universities, NGOs, or students to engage in exchanges with U.S.-based institutions?
Are you able to get that, Ambassador?
Sorry, I'm just unmuting myself. Yeah, thank you, 30, for your question. Yes, I think the Philippines and the United States will continue to have those good relations, and I think the opportunities for further exchanges will continue under the Trump administration. In conversations across all levels and of the Philippine and U.S. governments, I think there is that shared ambition, that shared goal of continuing to work together towards achieving objectives that are mutually shared between the Philippines and the United States, whether those are governmental issues or people-to-people issues. And I think what is just important is that we just allow the Trump administration to undergo the review and rationalization process that they are currently undertaking, and then at some point we pick up from where we left off.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Do we have another? Yes, please, sir. Introduce yourself. Okay. After him. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Justice Almawala from 1AB POLSCI. And my question is, earlier, the President of the United States just instituted 10% blanket tariffs all across the board for all countries. And as we all know, the US is one of the largest export markets for agricultural products in the Philippines. My question is, will the Philippines be considering retaliatory trade actions to to kind of punish the US for this?
Yeah, thank you, Justice. Well, I think I'm just gonna say, well, a couple of things. One is that right now, in the Philippine government, we have we're going to defer to the Department of Trade and Industry to provide the official Philippine government response to that. But I think here at the Department of Foreign Affairs, the position that we have taken is that these are early days. As you mentioned, this trade action on the part of the Trump administration was just taken overnight. So people, I guess, are trying to understand it, trying to digest it. So we are also reaching out to our counterparts in the United States to try to better understand exactly the context, the perspective, and obviously the process of implementing these these new tariffs that President Trump has mandated through the executive order that was signed last night. So, as I said, I think it's too early to provide any definitive response and to speculate on the kind of reaction or action that the Philippine government will take, and obviously any announcement to that effect will come from DTI in due course. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
sir.
We can take one final question. Yes, please, sir.
Good afternoon po, sir. So my question po is, what can we expect from the new Trump administration in terms of its pivot to Asia? So will it be something different from earlier administrations, or will it be a continuation of already existing and long-standing U.S. policy towards Asia and by extension the Philippines?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think generally the policy will remain the same in terms of the importance that Indo-Pacific has to the United States, not only in terms of the geopolitical and strategic interests of the U.S. here in this area, but really as I've emphasized in some parts of my remarks tonight, really this shared objective of ours with the United States for mutual prosperity, and that's something that we will continue to work on with the Trump administration. This effort to ensure that we continue working together across all areas of governmental relations, but I think equally important to the alliance and the defense and security cooperation that we've consistently had over the years is really to build on the economic partnership and engagements that we've had in the last few years and achieving mutual prosperity for both the Philippines and the United States. President Marcos has always been emphasizing that the economic development of the Philippines will also redound to the economic benefit of the United States. The two countries being two of the closest economic partners in the Indo-Pacific. So we look forward to continuing to work with the Trump administration in that regard.
Okay.
Thank you po, sir.
Thank you very much. So on that note, Ambassador Gonzaga, thank you very much. Thank you very much for accepting our
Thank you so
invitation
much.
to
Thank
participate
you.
in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker will provide insights into the evolving security relationship between the Philippines and the United States and its strategic implications. Please welcome Dr. Chester Cabalza. Dr. Chester Cabalza is a security expert specializing in security anthropology, strategic culture, and political anthropology. He is the founding president of the International Development and Security Cooperation and teaches at the University of Philippines, Diliman. A trusted advisor to national leaders, multinational firms, and embassies, he has consulted for the World Bank and JICA. He served as vice president for the Center of Research and Strategic Studies and is an executive fellow at the Development Academy of the Philippines. Additionally, Dr. Cabalza lectures at top military and police institutions and has published extensively on security and diplomacy. And without further ado, let us please welcome Dr. Chester Cabalza.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Alma, for that kind introduction. I'm happy to be here. Actually, it's my first time to speak before you, although my connections with Ateneo, ADMU, started when I began as a researcher at the Institute of Philippine Culture. So I spent 2 years there as an anthropologist, and now I'm into defense and security. And then with the U.S., I was one of the fellows for the SUSI. It's the Study on U.S. Institutes. So I got that scholarship in 2017. I was invited by the U.S. State Department, and at that time it was a game-changing, interesting time in the U.S. in Washington D.C. because that was the first time that President Trump became their CEO and of course the Commander-in-Chief and the President of the is it still the most powerful country perhaps in the world? But nonetheless, my topic is about the Philippines-U.S. military alliance. I'll try to give some future scenarios on the directions and strategic considerations of our alliance with us. By April 9, I guess we will celebrate and do the military exercises again with the Americans. It's going to be the 40th anniversary of the Balikatan exercises. That means that it started in 1985 before the people power, and of course we'll try to connect the dots. How come that they have this kind of policy, and what would be the future direction of our relationship with them? Okay, let's proceed to the next slide, please. Okay, just like what I said earlier, let's try to connect the dots. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, recently visited the Philippines. Although during his appointment, he was asked to name at least Southeast Asian country, but he wasn't able to give a correct answer. Finally, he was able to visit the Philippines. And I think that is a good start for his Asian trip. And I think during his speech before the defense community, he was able to pronounce some important keywords there, like re-engagement, ironclad alliance, support for self-reliant defense posture. Remember that we have now the revitalized self-reliant defense posture, which I will try to discuss later on. What's this SRDP that we are talking all about? And then, of course, the Typhoon missile. I think this is a catch in the rye from Beijing because they don't want the missile from the U.S., despite that we bought a BrahMos missile from India and Russia. So the difference of Typhoon missile, it's a land-based, mobile land-based missile. That's the reason why it can be transported from Ilocos going to Batanes. And that's why China is worried about it because they think that it's going to be an arms race on their part. But however, even if we bought BrahMos missile from India, China was silent about it. So let's try to digest and look at the elephant in the room later on, how come China is being like this, and why U.S. is very aggressive lately in terms of their power projection in our region, and especially with their ironclad commitment with the Philippines. Okay, 2 days ago, I think everyone were surprised by the joint drills of China in Taiwan, and they were trying to flex their military muscle in the South Island, in Taiwan, in Formosa, basically. And some were saying that Washington D.C. policymakers were saying that I think this is a way of China flexing its military power as a global military power, right? And I think it becomes a great issue, especially on the defense and security of the region, and what would be the position of the Philippines when it comes to Taiwan, given that we have a one China policy. And still, I remember 2 weeks ago, I was in Korea. Many of the Chinese scholars were saying that the position of China is still peaceful reunification with Taiwan. And there are 3 scenarios that they were stating there. One is that, of course, the peaceful resolution. Second scenario would be the forcible retake. And the third scenario would be the status quo. Taiwan remains as it is, and so on. Of course, just today, I think, where U.S. approves the $5.5 billion fighter jet sale, the F-16. And I think by next year, the Philippines will have the largest possession or ownership of the Black Hawk in the world. So that means that we are strengthening our air power, our air power. However, the question there, even if, well, remember, in military modernization, it's not all about acquisition or procurement, because you have to look at your facilities also. Like, say, for example, we can buy now, we have the money to buy submarine, but we don't have a berthing place. We can buy Rafale, but we don't have airdrome or the parking space for it. So you see the disconnected. And also we have to train also our pilots, military pilots, of course, the seamen, the naval, the Navy, and of course, the Army. So I think those are some of the issues that we still have to consider. Philippines extends invitation to Japan to join Balikatan in April 9 to May 9. We have last year there were 14 observer countries. Hopefully this year more, the more the merrier, said Colonel Padilla. We'll see, and we will expect more like-minded countries joining us in the Balikatan exercises, especially that this is a milestone for us. It's the 40th anniversary of the Balikatan exercises. Okay, let's proceed to the next slide. Okay. I pitched this idea during 2 weeks ago with the American and Chinese scholars on multi-alignment, especially now where Trump has become more predictable. Some were saying he's unpredictable. The more he becomes unpredictable, he becomes predictable, right? So when he says no, that means yes. When he says yes, that means no. So in other words, if he says that he will not help us, that means that perhaps he still will give us the opportunity to support us. So you see those kinds of unpredictability that even in multi-alignment, even in the U.S., they're thinking about this multi-alignment in terms of their defense partnerships, especially that they have now a divorce with Europe, perhaps. So we'll see what happens after the Russia-Ukraine war, and of course their focus on the Middle East with the Brotherhood border, and they cannot afford another war in the Indo-Pacific, because of course that's going to be expensive for them if we wish to see China and China and the U.S. going to war, because these are two of the most wealthiest countries in the world. So we are thinking of the cooperation with reliable. The key word there is reliable dialogue partners, because of course the European friends were saying, is the U.S. still reliable for the Philippines? Is the U.S. still reliable also, given that of course we have the a good example would be the Mutual Defense Treaty. Since the crafting of the 1951 MDT, it has never been invoked. And we don't want that in the next 50 years. It's the same thing, that we will never invoke MDT, and the relationship with the U.S. will be the same status quo. So it's up to you on how do you think it in terms of the symmetric and asymmetrical relationship with the U.S. in our defense partnerships with them. Okay, policy innovations. I've seen 20 years in the defense and security sector. I've seen how the AFP has evolved. It used to be the most hated organization, especially during the first Marcosian era with the imposition of the martial law. But now it's one of the most respected and trusted organization in the Philippines. We saw the change, the paradigm shift, and we've seen also their transformation and dedication in terms of their strategy from internal security to external defense or territorial defense. And now they're carrying on, especially in the Balikatan exercises in 2025, they will try to exercise or put in full force the full battle test, where they will expose and exercise their plans, doctrines, and policies, basically, especially in the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. Okay, maritime rules-based order. I think while we are trying to position ourselves as the vanguard advocate and bearer of maritime rules-based, or maybe at least the rules-based order. Our current position right now with what is happening in our politics, especially on ICC, will also determine our position in terms of a bearer of the rules-based order. Okay, so some later on, perhaps during the open forum, you can discuss. We can discuss about that. Okay, next. All right, slide. The issue now, I think, is it's going to be a tech war, right? We've seen the rise of BYD and Tesla, and also we've seen also these submersible drone swarms and the use of missiles, and there will be more changes technologically speaking. And I think the war that we will see, the future warfare that we will perhaps see today and in the future, it's not the kinetic war that we've seen during the Second World War or during the Cold War. It's going to be more of information warfare, cognitive warfare, cyber warfare, which I think is happening now. And with the rise of artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, there will be some changes. And today is 2025, 10 years from now, 2035, many of countries in the future will also be using robots or robotics for their military. So we will see a lot of changes when it comes to that, especially for many East Asian countries where their population are aging. And even the U.S., they're thinking about that in terms of their future warfare and so on. All right, so that's what we are seeing, especially for China now, which has become the biggest and largest in terms of military assets in the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Coast Guard. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So we've seen the multi-domain strategy. That means there are 5 domains in the military: the air, land, water, the land, air, maritime or water, space, and cyberspace, right? And if war erupts in our region, in our West Philippine Sea, or even in Taiwan, then it's going to be a total disruption, because we will be seeing all kinds of strategic domains that will be used for warfare there. So in other words, the AFP will really have to rehearse the future, and will have to be more ready with all these kinds of strategies that our big power, these hegemonic powers will try to exercise in our own backyard. Okay, what do we still see there? Of course, next slide, please. So how do we see the world in terms of our U.S.-Philippines alliance? Remember, in security, it's always been, we call it the VUCAD world, no? It's vulnerable, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and disruptive. Now with the tech war and so on, it's going to be more brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible, rapid, unpredictable, paradoxical, and tangled. So that's how we see the world for many naysayers, or those who see the world that it's going to be more dangerous, because of course many see that the world is an anarchic world. Okay, perhaps for my few last slides. Okay, I've written last year I've written in 2021 a book on the rise of Philippinization. Philippinization is not Finlandization. If you want to see that, it's in Amazon. And it's all about the resistance movement. Many Ukrainian policymakers use that book on how they are going to confront Russia. And in 2020, last year, 2024, I wrote the book on Philippine territorial defense. The Army is using the book for their strategy making. And this year, I'm going to publish a book on defense, self-reliant defense posture, because I haven't seen a literature on SRDP in the Philippines. I told you, SRDP is not new in the Philippines. We were the first one to come up with the law. Although during the first Marcosian era, it's more of the investments, the influx of investments are international, comes from foreign. But this one, with the new law on the revitalized SRDP, it talks about the investment of local investors. So they wanted to encourage more Filipinos of course, to increase local defense industries in the country. We have good examples already around the country. Perhaps if I won't tell more yet. The new book. So maybe later on. But okay, let's move to the last slide. Today is 2025. I think we're number 36. I think worldwide. But some were saying that by 2075, the Philippines will be the 14th biggest economy. And look at this data here. Indonesia was able to become big because of their major transformation in their military. And many of their leaders had a military background. We're not saying that we should do the same thing. We tried in our country before, but it didn't pay off in a good way. But what I'm saying is that there are potentials for the Philippines, but I think this is the best time, especially for if we try to diversify our defense policy, if we have a good, clever plans for military modernization, for us to strengthen our territorial defense operation, and of course, our self-reliant defense posture. So I'll end with that. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cabalza. That was very enlightening. Now we shift our focus to the economic front. Our next speaker will examine the impact of U.S. trade policies and global economic trends in the Philippines. Dr. Geoffrey Ducanes is an associate professor of economics at Ateneo de Manila University and a board treasurer and fellow at the social weather stations. He holds a PhD and MA in economics from the UP School of Economics and a BS in statistics from UP Diliman. Dr. Ducanes has held key research and academic positions, including senior research fellow at the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, consultant roles at the ADB, the Asia Foundation, the ASEAN Secretariat, and the UP School of Economics, and Ateneo faculty positions. A recipient of the Outstanding Young Scientist Award in Economics from NASD, Dr. Ducanes has published extensively on economic growth, labor markets, applied econometrics, international migration, poverty, inequality, labor economics, and macroeconomic forecasting. Without further ado, Dr. Geoffrey Ducanes. Round of applause, please. Thank you.
So good evening, distinguished guests, colleagues, and students. So I'm here to talk about U.S. trade policies, their likely consequences, and key considerations for the Philippines. So when we talk about U.S. trade policy, at the moment what we really mean is tariff policy, which is the main trade policy handle used by the Trump administration. Next slide, please. So the outline of my presentation will be this. So I will first discuss the U.S.'s current tariff policy, including what was announced this morning. I will then go briefly to the expected impact on the global economy, and finally on the impact on the Philippines, focusing primarily on the transmission mechanism. Next slide, please. So the current U.S. trade policy is a heavy reliance on tariffs. A tariff, just in case you don't know, is a tax on imports. So if you impose a tariff on a good, you basically make it more costly for an importer to purchase that good. If that importer is also a trader, that importer will have to sell that good at a higher price, possibly by the amount of the tariff, but also possibly less if the importer is willing to accept a smaller margin. Of course, a tariff adds to the tax revenues of the country imposing the tariff for as long as it does not result in zero consumption of the good being taxed. So President Trump is a great believer in tariffs. He also relied on tariffs during his first term, although not as much as he is at the moment. So you can see in the slide some of the statements President Trump has made about tariffs. Next slide, please. So in this slide, you can see the amount of reciprocal tariffs that was announced by the U.S. this morning against some of its biggest trading partners. It was targeted particularly at those countries against which the U.S. has trade deficits in goods. So you have a trade deficit with a country if you are importing from it more than you are exporting. So in this table, that is indicated by the column on U.S. trade balance. So that's the second to the last column. So for example, against the Philippines, it says that the U.S. has a trade deficit of $5 billion. That means that the U.S. is importing $5 billion worth more of goods than it is exporting to the Philippines. It also says that according to their computation, the Philippines charges the equivalent of a 34% tariff on U.S. goods. And in response, they will be charging, starting April 9, a tariff of 17% against goods from the Philippines. So that represents a very large increase because currently the average tariff faced by Philippine products to the U.S. is estimated at only about 6% on average. However, that 34% that the U.S. claims is the tariff rate for their goods exported to the Philippines is highly in dispute. It is not clear at the moment how that is computed because the actual tariff rate is much, much lower, less than 10%, according to computations. But as you can see also from the table, the new U.S. reciprocal tariff rates is much higher for the other countries compared to the Philippines, including other ASEAN countries, except for Singapore. So Singapore gets the minimum 10%. But for example, look at Vietnam. Vietnam, the reciprocal tariff is 46%, so almost half. So if they're going to sell, if you're going to sell a Vietnamese good to the U.S., you have to add 50%, almost 50% just from the tariff. China, it's more than 50% because on top of the already existing 20%, the U.S. is adding 34% in addition. Next slide, please. Prior to the tariff announcement this morning, in the past 2 months, President Trump has made several policy pronouncements on tariffs affecting mainly China, Mexico, and Canada. These are higher tariffs on aluminum, steel, and effective today, also automobiles. The tariff on China, as I said earlier, was increased to 20% from 10% in February, and today will be further increased to 54%. Next slide, please. So why the increase in tariffs? Why is the U.S. doing this? According to President Trump and White House officials who have been interviewed, so they have basically given different justifications. First, they said they are doing this to bring back manufacturing jobs to the U.S. So they're trying to use tariff to make importing less attractive and local sourcing more attractive. So by doing this, they hope that they will encourage manufacturing to move back to the U.S. from countries like China and Vietnam and some other Southeast Asian countries which have become the world's manufacturing hubs. The second reason they have given is to raise government revenues. So in his first term, President Trump introduced tax cuts, which is set to expire this year. So in order to continue that, the U.S. would need money. So in order to be able to extend the tax cuts or even make it permanent, they need additional sources of revenues, and tariffs can be at least part of that. A third reason given is to stop the flow of illegal migration and fentanyl to the U.S. This was especially the case for the initial increase in tariffs announced against China, Mexico, and Canada. Because people argue that, well, tariffs will not really cure the trade deficits immediately, so why are you doing it? And it will increase inflation and so on. And they said that, no, we're just using it as a trade bargaining chip to get Mexico and Canada, for example, to have more policies against fentanyl, or the transport of fentanyl to the U.S. So basically, it's the use of tariffs as a leverage. And of course, a fourth, which is implicit, is to reduce the U.S. trade deficit in goods and to achieve trade balance. President Trump likes to keep score, as you know, and the trade deficit for him is a loss and a trade surplus is a win. Although for economists, that's not really how we look at trade deficit. Trade, whether you pay or you get the good, is in theory mutually beneficial. Okay. Next slide, please. So what will be the effect on the U.S. and its trade partners of this tariff policy? So for sure, it will result in some retaliatory tariffs. For example, China has already increased tariffs on U.S. products as an earlier response and is likely to increase tariffs further in response to the announcement today. The European Union has also said it will respond, possibly by increasing tariffs on services from the US, including financial services and technology services, affecting firms, for example, like Google and Meta, which are based in the US. Some countries, if you read the news earlier, some countries protested the increased tariffs, but already they said that they are not raising tariffs against the US because essentially they were saying that if they raise tariffs, it will be a case of cutting your nose to spite your face. So it will be self-destructive. They will just be harming themselves by raising tariffs in response. Tariffs hike the price of imports, and at least some of the price increase gets passed on to consumers. So this can be expected to result in higher consumer inflation. The reality also is that a lot of imports get used as inputs to production. So for example, if you look at Philippine imports and exports, our main exports is semiconductors or electronics, but also our biggest imports is also electronics. How does that happen? It's because the imports also go into inputs into the exports. So you almost never export something 100% from your country unless it's a commodity, like agricultural products. And the reality also is that, imports get used as inputs to production. So the tariffs can be expected to increase production costs. So this means lower demand for goods, lower output by firms, which can lead to lower employment, especially in the short term. Next slide, please. So in fact, you can see this if you look at the stock market indices. So the stock price of a company essentially reflects expectations about the future profitability of that company. So if you look at what has happened to US stock prices since February, for example, when President Trump started announcing additional tariffs, stock prices have been declining. So February, that's the peak. And then after that, you see a sort of declining trend. This is the Dow Jones Industrial Index, which is a broad basket of companies. This is the NASDAQ Composite Index, which is more focused on technology companies. So either one, you see a declining trend in the stock market index since February. And this was as of yesterday. Before today's tariff announcement, the futures market this morning indicated that the Dow Jones Index will fall by 2%, so it will fall by 2%, and the NASDAQ will fall by 3.4% when the market opens tonight. So additional expectation of lower profitability of firms as a consequence of today's tariff announcement. Next slide, please. And then this shows you what happened in the Japan stock market and the Vietnam stock market today. And in fact, the past 2 months, but today especially, so the last part of the graph, again, very sharp declines, reflecting the expectation that firms will be less profitable in these countries, so major trading partners of the US, in the future. Next slide, please. So how will the Philippine economy be affected? So the economy, or economic well-being, is of course a very broad concept. So it includes not just how much the country produces, but also the choices available to people, the quality of those choices, the people's subjective well-being, among others. But for simplicity, just to help us think about it, we just focus on economic output, which is usually measured by gross domestic product, or GDP. So if you took up introductory economics, one of the things that you learn is that GDP can be computed as the sum of consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports. C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So using the simple framework, we can see that the effect of the tariffs on economic output can go through various channels. So for example, next slide please. You have the export channel, which is probably the main channel. So our exports are the goods and services we sell to other countries. The level of our exports, intuitively, of course, will depend mainly on the price of our exports, the price of our exports relative to the price of our competitors for the same goods or services, and the income level of our export markets. Of course, the U.S. is our biggest export market. Everything remaining the same, the higher tariffs on Philippine goods will lead to a higher price and lower demand for Philippine exports in the U.S. So we'll call this the absolute price effect. Already, even before today's tariff announcements, it was already being projected that as a result of the February and March tariffs of the U.S., that the U.S. economy will grow slower by 0.5%. Also, those affected countries, Canada, Mexico, China, their GDP will also be affected, and they will grow slower by 1 to 2%. So that's the second effect. So the U.S. tariffs are expected to lower U.S. GDP by about 0.5% prior to today's tariff announcement, and almost certainly by more because of today's tariff announcement. It was also expected to lower the GDP of its main trading partners like China and Japan significantly. This happened also to be our main trading partners. As a result, we expect demand for our exports to decline also via this channel, which is the income channel. On the other hand, as we saw earlier, the reciprocal tariff on the Philippines is lower than for the other ASEAN countries except for Singapore. So to the extent that we export the same goods to the U.S. as these countries, this can possibly result in a shift to our goods and thus a possible increase in our exports. But this is contentious. Our main export, as I said earlier, is electronic exports, particularly semiconductors, which has a lot of import content from these other countries. So there's this question: how will the U.S. treat these products? Will they be treated as purely from the Philippines because we are the final source, or will they count the part that is sourced from these other countries? In my opinion, of course, so there's positive, there's negative effect. In my opinion, on balance, the effect on Philippine exports will be negative. So I think the Philippine exports will decline on balance. Next slide, please. Then there's also the import channel. So our imports depends mainly on the following: our income level, the price of imports, and the price of imports. If Philippine GDP declines as a result of the U.S. tariffs, this should reduce imports and have a positive effect on GDP. And in addition, since the U.S. is our 5th biggest source of imports, if we engage in retaliatory tariffs, this would also increase the price of U.S. imports and also reduce imports, which would also tend to increase GDP. So this is one of the strange things about GDP. It will increase even if the development represents a narrowing of available choices to consumers. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I have, I think, only a minute left, so I'll try to be quick. There's also the consumption channel. Our consumption depends mainly on our disposable income, which largely depends on economic output. If economic output declines as a result of the U.S. tariffs, this would mean fewer people will have jobs, or some will work less hours. This would reduce consumption and thus have a negative effect on GDP. And finally, there is the investment channel. Our investment depends mainly on expectations about business prospects in the future, especially as to how such prospects will affect disposable income and the interest rate. If Philippine GDP is expected to decline as a result of the tariffs, this should make investments in the Philippines less attractive because they are less likely to be profitable and thus reduce investment and negative effect on GDP. Additionally, the tariffs can add to inflation, and higher inflation usually leads to higher interest rates, adding more downward pressure on investment because many investors borrow money to finance their investments. I think last slide. So I'll just finish it. So in totality, the net effect of the higher US tariffs will probably be negative on the Philippine economy. Philippine GDP growth will likely be lower this year with the announced US tariffs compared to in its absence. The announced government target is from 6 to 8% growth this year. You know, contrary to popular belief, economists are not really serious. But if you force me to make a prediction, my own guess is that the new development should put the target at 5 to 7%, maybe 1% lower growth for the Philippines because of this development. But the effect on the Philippine economy will likely be lower than for many trading partners of the U.S., especially other ASEAN countries, as net exports is a smaller part of our economy. And government spending is where we can adjust, for instance, by providing targeted support to those who might be directly affected by higher tariffs, or just by further increasing government spending on infrastructure and social services. Longer term, broadening the export market so that there is less dependence on any one country, and broadening the domestic market by continuing to expand the middle class would make us less vulnerable to similar events. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jeff. Finally, we turn to the labor and migration issues, particularly how the new U.S. administration's policies will affect Filipino migrants. Delivering this talk is Assistant Secretary Levinson C. Alcantara of the Department of Migrant Workers. Assistant Secretary Alcantara is a distinguished expert in labor, migration, employment policy, and international labor standards. He serves as Assistant Secretary for Pre-Employment Services and Management Information and Technology Service at the Department of Migrant Workers. With over 2 decades of experience in government service, he has played a crucial role in policy development, in international negotiations and stakeholder consultations on labor migration. Before his current role, he served as acting director at the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration, or POEA, and Chief Labor and Employment Officer at the Institute of Labor Studies. Assistant Secretary Alcantara holds a Master of Arts in International Relations, specializing in labor migration from Waseda University, Japan, and a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from the University of the Philippines. Without further ado, Assistant Secretary Alcantara.
Honored torchbearers of the Severino lecture series, esteemed co-lecturers, participants, professors. Good afternoon, everyone. The assignment that was provided to me is to shed light on what will be the impact of the new U.S. administration's migration policies on overseas Filipino workers, or the Filipino migrants in the United States. The potential impacts are many, right down to the worst-case scenarios of massive deportation to reduction of remittances. But let me just step back a little bit more on why we are discussing this, the repercussions on the social and political discourses happening elsewhere, reaching our shores, which Ambassador Chan-Gonzaga has described as several conversations on, by, and among overseas Filipino workers and their families affected by the seemingly distant sparks overseas. Why? We are a population composed of more than 10% labor migrants. We are a population that relies on a 38.4 billion US dollars remittance just in 2024. And we are a population that sends out temporary migrant workers overseas at levels of more than 2 million individuals per year. In the sphere of foreign policy, there are 3 pillars in the Philippine foreign policy, ones that have been discussed by our esteemed discussants. One on security, the other pillar is on economy. The third, which is quite unique to the Philippines, is the protection of migrant workers. And that's where, as Ambassador Chan-Gonzaga has expansively described to us, the people-to-people, or labor diplomacy, if you like, is the one that is more special in the Philippines when a lot of things happen elsewhere in the world. So I am bringing down several notches my presentation to the specific field on labor migration, or what we fondly label as overseas Filipino diaspora. And then the more pragmatic approaches that the government is pursuing through the Department of Migrant Workers, who is out there in the United States, what are the approaches that are ready to be deployed, and then some data, some speculations, and then the actual practice that we do. In the earlier installation of the second Trump administration, analyzing the discourses of more restrictive labor migration policy, what we have seen is that the more palpable impact on overseas Filipino workers, whether documented or undocumented, is that there could be more restrictive issuances of visas to the United States, delays in the issuance of visas to those more filtered ones. The legal challenge on the already existing policy of birthright citizenship. It could be interpreted other way, meaning not those who have been born in the United States might get citizenship in the future. Stricter enforcement of immigration rules, of course, will end up in crackdowns. Aggressive enforcement of immigration laws also, of course, would increase on the anxiety and the mental health of our workers, which could redound to lower productivity, lower remittances, and therefore lower buffer levels of the U.S. reserve, U.S. currency reserves that we have in the country. So, next slide, please. Yeah, I tend to do this when I do presentations, stray away from the title page, and then and that's the reason why I remind myself to place outlines in all of my presentations, especially in the economic setting. What are the migration pathways to the United States? What are the OFWs that we at the Department of Migrant Workers actually see as primary clients? How many OFWs are there in the United States going through the documented proper channels? And then what are the care functions that the Department of Migrant Workers would have to perform in terms of eventualities of harsh migration policies? So next slide, please. There's a broken line that divides the several pathways that go through the United States. Those that are above are not under the care of the Department of Migrant Workers. Cultural exchanges, family-based immigration for immediate or family preference, who are already in the United States as citizens or green card holders, and then the other kinds of immigrants, adoptive, the diversity, inclusiveness, and special immigrant categories. What we are guiding through the regular pathways of labor migration are those employment-based migrations from E1 to E5, but most popularly in the area of employment third preference, the skilled workers, the professionals, and unskilled workers. Let me turn now my presentation to who the overseas Filipino workers are. We tend to have a very general picture of who the overseas Filipino workers are because culturally a Filipino who leaves the country has the primary intention of finding work, but it's actually a nuanced definition under the law. Under Republic Act 11641, an overseas Filipino worker refers to a Filipino who is to be engaged, is engaged, or has been engaged in remunerated activity in a country of which he or she is not an immigrant, not a citizen, not a permanent resident, or is not awaiting naturalization, recognition, or admission, whether land-based or sea-based, so that includes our seafarers, and then regardless of status. The status being referred to here is whether you are documented or undocumented sea-based or land-based worker. And this excludes a Filipino engaged under a government-recognized exchange visitor program. In the case of the United States, the J1 program participants for cultural and educational purposes. And for purposes of this provision, which is also which puts a time frame on who the overseas Filipino worker is the temporariness or the circular nature of the migration, which says, for purposes of this provision, a person engaged in remunerated activity covers a person who has been contracted for overseas employment but has yet to leave the Philippines, regardless of status, and includes overseas contract workers. And the term OFW is synonymous to migrant workers. So medyo circular yung definition. But it simply means that if you have been contracted out to work overseas and that you are not yet a citizen there, you are an OFW. And in the experience of COVID-19 pandemic, towards the tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of those who have been already hired overseas but have been delayed in terms of deployment were already considered OFWs, and therefore we need to act on their welfare, assist them in ways we can, because by law we should be assisting all overseas Filipino workers. So in terms of the visas that are being held by OFWs going through the United States, next slide please. There are several. There are teachers, healthcare workers, IT professionals holding H-1B visa, seasonal non-agricultural workers in hotel and restaurants, amusement and recreation and construction, as well as landscaping, hired under H-2B visa program. This is a selective program. We are not eligible to H-2A program, but we are eligible to be holders of H-2B visas in the United States and its territories. Next slide, please. And then there are those who are CW1 visa program holders and A2 visa for the staff of our foreign missions in the United States. And then some Filipinos, highly skilled ones, hired through international organizations holding G4 visa. Next slide, please. And then some A3 and G5 visa, B1 and then C1, or those that transit through the United States. The next slides will tell us that there's actually, despite the, next slide please, despite the minuscule share of the United States in terms of deployment of overseas Filipino workers, owing of course to the other pathways going to the United States. Most of us go through the immigration, permanent immigration pathway. The temporary foreign work pathway for 2023 and 2024 looks like this. 2,000 in 2023, total a little more than 1,000 in 2024. And it's actually varied. I only selected top 15 skills group. And as you can see, most of them are in the education and the healthcare sector, also in the construction, a little bit on the professional, but also representative are hotel, office cleaners, helpers, and domestic workers. The trend, next slide please, is similar when we talk about direct hires, ones that are being hired not through private recruitment agencies, and is likewise similar, next slide please, to the returning workers. So hindi po nagkakaiba. The returning workers or balik manggagawa also comprise of the top 15 skills group that are represented in the other slides. So what are the care functions in case push comes to shove and worst case scenario? What should the Department of Migrant Workers, the government in general, do? Right there at the start in the Declaration of Policies on RA 11641, which created the Department of Migrant Workers in December 2021, it said that it is the duty of the state to protect the rights and promote the welfare of overseas Filipino workers and their families, ensuring that private recruitment shall meet professional, legal, and ethical standards. That's before they get to be deployed. Obtaining the best possible conditions of work and uphold the dignity of overseas Filipino workers. That's talking about standards of employment. Providing timely and responsive services to address their needs regardless of legal status. that's the welfare services and other assistance that we could provide, ensuring their participation in the formulation of policies affecting their welfare, that's stakeholder consultation and Filipino community building, and providing mechanisms for skills development and reintegration. This is the more developmental and exciting part, because the reintegration program of the government has been for a while lackluster in terms of performance. We need, for example, the stronger economies across Asia now to study the models that they have deployed in bringing back the riches, the expertise, the capital, and the skills into the country. I'm citing examples of India, Japan, China, as they have had a long history of labor migrations themselves, but have reaped the benefits of such through, as evidenced by their current strength in terms of economy in the current days. So when we translate the care functions of the DMW, here are the things that we are actually currently doing now. Next slide, please. Where are we? First, aside from the embassy in Washington, D.C., consulates in Agana, Chicago, Honolulu, Houston, LA, New York, and San Francisco, the Philippines has 2 migrant worker offices in the United States, one in Washington, D.C., and another in Los Angeles. The migrant workers offices serve as labor sections of our foreign posts, and they provide several functions. But since they are in the scene already, they are the ones that we depend on in the provision of immediate welfare and assistance services to affected OFWs, whether documented or undocumented. Next slide. These includes consultations, assembly, workplace assessments in coordination with employer and or local authorities, putting up of migrant worker resource center for group activities, training, on-site upskilling. Next slide, please. Putting up workplace accommodations or visits when the OFWs fall through the cracks, provision of immediate worker needs, food supply, cash assistance, and in some cases, assistance in getting temporary shelters. Likewise, as a way of wrapping up, next slide, please. The OFWs from the DMW can get repatriation services. We also provide financial, medical, and legal assistance through the Agarang Aksyon Kalinga at Saklolo para sa mga OFW na nangangailangan, or Action Fund. This is a legislated fund provided to the Department of Migrant Workers and needs to be disbursed to anybody who is falling under the definition of a distressed OFW. And then, of course, the reintegration services in the government that is being buffered up by capacity building for entrepreneurship, livelihood packages, whether for loan or the initial seed fund that is given out, linked to productive resources, capitals, skills in accounting, market link up. There's now a project being called Buy Local by OFWs. The reskilling and upskilling sa Pilipinos, ikaw ang ma'am, sir, for example, for those professionals who went to overseas work in less skilled job categories, but wish to come back and practice their professions. This one is piloted across teachers, now through healthcare workers, from HSWs to caregivers, upskilling in more high-paying countries of destination. And then, of course, if they feel that they are not yet ready to reintegrate and need to go abroad once more, there's a referral for redeployment after gaining more skills back here in the Philippines. That's what I have prepared for slides this afternoon. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, esteemed speakers. I will now have to turn you over to Dr. Noel P. de Guzman for the Q&A. Yes, please. May we ask our speakers to sit in front, please. after we've rearranged the stage. Thank you.
I believe we can invite our esteemed speakers to form a panel here in front. Okay, so we have reached the Q&A portion, and I was told that we have around 15 minutes for this. It's right. It's 6:40 right now, so we can have up to 6:55. All right. So let's begin the Q&A. So please raise your hand, and when you come up to the microphone, please make sure to introduce yourself and let us know to which of our resource persons your particular question is directed to. So. Okay, I saw a hand at the back. I think he or she was first. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Come forward. Approach the microphone, please. There in the middle.
Magandang hapon. I'm Ellen Sana from the Center for Migrant Advocacy. Siyempre po ang aking tatanong tungkol sa mga Filipinos in the U.S. So this is directed to Assistant Secretary Levy. Of course, Ambassador Romualdez already hinted that there have been deportations, but he wouldn't disclose the numbers for whatever reason. Pero pwede ko bang itanong, have there been deportations as part of the Trump policies now? And this one, related to that, nakahandcuff ba yung mga undocumented? Because of course I understand there are deportations, but this is not like part of the new immigration policies, but these are nakaschedule na yun ng mga deportations, but under the new policy yon. And then siguro the last part, because you mentioned the MWOs, I understand that the MWO, particularly in the DC area, covers the biggest in terms of territories, because outside of DC, you also have to take care of the Caribbean, etc. And how many people do you have at the MWO? Okay ba yung personnel natin? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Miss Ellen. First, I'll answer the easier part on how are we going to be able to manage massive deportations if ever they happen. I'd highlight on the strength of Filipino communities in the United States, as was also presented by Ambassador Gonzaga earlier this afternoon. We have been getting in touch with Filipino communities, leaders, as well as those OFW family circles in organizing ready groups that can assist our kababayans when that eventuality happens. Kasi mas madaling mag-gather ng information through Marites. Anthropologist ka, sir, you know this, how effective the Filipino grapevine is on who's not documented, who's documented, who's most probably liable of being sent home. So yes, we are in close contact with the Filipino communities. Maliit po, admittedly, yung ating mga migrant workers offices and also our embassies kasi hindi rin naman yung mga primary functions nila. But we are also aside from the Filipino communities, of course, we're also banking on the deep ties that we have with the host governments because in the past, marami na rin naman pong nadideport doon sa regular na implementation ng kanilang migration policies. And it wasn't as painful as we imagined it would be. And of course, third aspect of that one is this time around there are some social protection that we could provide to our kababayans coming back home. There are some not really huge amounts of money, but something that can help them tide over in reintegrating or looking back for more productive resources as they come back. Meron tayong financial assistance that are ready for them. And of course, the cost of repatriation will be on government kasi meron naman pong nakabudget para dyan. As to the estimate, there's in the last one, and this is called from a public document. Meron naman pong reports to Congress on how many ang estimated natin na stock ng Filipinos in the United States. So merong permanent migrants doon, merong documented na temporary Filipino non-immigrants, and then there are undocumented ones. This is a cumulative figure. It might have increased or decreased, but it's about 8.4% of 4.4 million. You like to do the math? Mga 370,000, but they are in several stages of being naturalized, also filing application, naabutan lang ng deadline. So hindi naman lahat yon ay will undergo the process of being sent home. So iba-iba din po yung treatment for all of those cases.
Thank
That's
you.
how I'm going to respond to that, Miss Ellen.
All right, so thank you, ASEC Alcantara. Can we have the next question? Yes, that lady in red, please introduce yourself.
Hello. I'm Nadine Ara from 1AB DepIR. This question is directed to Dr. Chester. So my question is, the U.S. foreign policy has shifted specifically to the deterrence of China's invasion in Taiwan, and it may have a possibility of spilling over to the Philippines and the dispute on the West Philippine Sea. And with the given initiatives already with the Balikatan exercises, the existing agreements, and with the ongoing improvements in our defense and security, my question is, how do we ensure that the U.S. won't withdraw from the Philippine support the same way that they did from Ukraine and Afghanistan? Thank you.
Oh, that's an interesting question. How would I put it in a nice way? Of course, I think the U.S. will bank on our alliance. I think they did not have that with Ukraine. The longevity of our alliance is one of the longest in the world so far, since the Commonwealth era. And now that Washington, DC is looking up to this region in the Indo-Pacific. Remember, it was Trump who first drafted the Indo-Pacific strategy of the U.S. And now he's coming back, pivoting to Asia. It's different from what has been done during the time of Obama. This time around, they really have to catch up. And for me, it's like the last battle of the West. If the U.S. cannot catch up with China, then it's going to be Pax Sinica in the future. We do not know if the U.S. will maintain its Pax Americana order. Remember that the world is a multipolar world right now. We are in this stage where we are nominating who's going to lead us in the future. We do not know if it's still the U.S. that will dominate all the dimensions of what we are seeing in the future, but you have some other challengers, right? Like India, perhaps China, of course, and Russia, and so on. So I guess going back to the question there, will it be strengthened? Do we see a robust relationship? I think so. The mere fact that they exempted us with the security aid and they are selling many of their military material with us with interest. And I think the lesson that we should learn here is self-reliance and multi-alignment. We've been faithful with the Americans for 50 years in Hollywood. We don't want to extend that Hollywood dream. There is a K-drama now, so there are alternatives, in other words. The world has awakened to a new world where there are alternatives. And I think the most important would be collaboration. When we do self-reliance, there are private sectors that should be encouraged with. No, there's a PPP, public-private partnership. There's the whole of society approach. So everyone is invited to participate and help in this new kind of endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cabalza. Doc Leslie, you raised your hand a while ago. Can you please approach the microphone?
I have two related questions. First is on Chester, and then second to Professor Ducanes. I'm just curious about your SRDP, your self-reliance defense program. We know that Modernization 1 did not work. That's why we have Modernization 2. And based on the ground information and the interviews that I did with the Balikatan exercises, the main complaints of Filipino officers and soldiers is that, technologically speaking, they're not allowed to touch the technology of the Americans. They're just there to be expecting. So my question is, how do you see this moving forward? Because I don't see the human agent. I agree with you that technology is the name of the game in the next 10 to 20 years, but I don't see what are the plans of the DND and the AFP in terms of leveling up, okay, the professionalism and leadership of Filipino soldiers so that they're ready to the whatever form that the next security arena is going to take form. And then related to this, if we're going to have a more vibrant defense industry, Professor Ducanes, will this be enough, for example, to recoup whatever losses that we're going to be experiencing because of the decision of the U.S. to impose tariff on all the other countries in the world? So basically, two questions. Thank you.
I'll go first. Then, hello, Dr. Leslie. Anyway, in the upcoming book that I'm writing on SRTP, I always remember what the late Gina Lopez has said, that if you do a project, make one project that will become the model for big projects. And I've been pitching this idea with the AFP that among the 5 domains, remember the 5 domains that I mentioned earlier, land, air, water, space, cyberspace. Cyberspace is more feasible, right? We have the pool of talent of cyber experts in the country. And then I've been telling the armed forces, the Coast Guard, and also the police to recruit more cyber warriors. Their training would be different from regular forces and reserved forces. We need, because IT cyber people are, they behave differently. But as long as they can shoot a ship or a plane with just one click, then they're successful. We need more platforms on this. Remember, Estonia is just a small country in Europe, but it's the hub of NATO when it comes to cybersecurity. If the Philippines can become the hub of cybersecurity in Southeast Asia, then that's good. I mean, I've been telling, if AFP, PNP, PCG, I've been challenging them, make at least your organization the best in Southeast Asia. That's going to be your benchmark, then use cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, emerging technology. So focus on that niche. It doesn't mean that you have to be very good at all 5 domains because we cannot compete. Reality bites. But if we can harness cybersecurity, recruit more cyber warriors, and then we have a plethora of good policies when it comes to cybersecurity, from data privacy to from fact checking, of fake news, and then of course amid this, I told you that the future warfare would be disinformation. And so on. So I guess that would be a good solution for this competition, especially that the SRDP has been revived. Remember, many of these laws have been revived, like modernization law. It started in 1995 and then it was revived in 2012. Same as true with the SRDP. It started during the first bar caution era. We are in the second bar caution era. So I hope that we succeed this time around. Thank you.
Okay, to answer the question, I think there are two levels to it. So again, GDP equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So if consumption goes down, if export goes down, if investment goes down because of the tariffs, can it be compensated for by more military spending? So that will go to G. So it depends on the amount of military spending. So in theory, it's possible. But the second layer is who will be affected by the tariffs? So possibly the farmers, if agricultural exports are affected, possibly manufacturers and employees of manufacturing firms. So there might be a mismatch in who gets to benefit from greater military spending and who gets affected by the tariffs. So there's that layer that has to be bridged. So at some point you have to sort of maybe more social protection, more support for the kind of manufacturing, the kind of agriculture that will be affected by the higher tariffs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cabalza and Dr. Ducanes. We have 1 minute left, so we have time only for one question, but I think that gentleman there in the blue shirt will take the last question. I'm sorry for the rest, but time is limited. Sige, introduce yourself.
Hello, speakers. I am Rafael Dionco from 2AB POLSCI. So I guess I have two questions. So the first, I want to direct to Mr. Levinson Alcantara. So how do we ensure stable and constant migration to the United States without relying just on mere demand for our workers, given that we do not have a bilateral labor agreement or a memorandum of understanding with the U.S., though I think we do have labor arrangements with the U.S. But also the H-1B visa, which is our primary entry point, where Trump has been very unstable about. So how do we ensure this constant and stable migration? And my second question, I guess, for all the speakers, how do all these developments, militarily, economic, how do these impact our midterm elections? That's all. Thank you.
All right, really good question. And time and again, every time a country of destination tells us that they no longer need our workers, sooner or later they blink. Because the demographics will tell you that the U.S. population is actually in need of healthcare workers, educators. There's a reverse trend in Thomas Heights now. We are the ones sending teachers to the United States. So at first blush, we would be thinking long-term decrease, but actually, in reality, this has happened before already. And not just with the United States. It's a global projection that most of the G20 economies are declining in terms of productive sections of their population. And we are medyo tail end naman dun sa sweet demographic spot natin. And we're still the one that they prefer. So, ganon ako ka-hopeful in terms of deploying workers to the United States. And sige, I'll just correct the impression that I might have made wrongly in my presentation. H-1B is the one where we count the most kasi yung definition natin ng OFW is that hindi siya migration pathway. But for all the other pathways, mataas yung deployments natin. Kaya lang hindi natin binibilang as OFW. So yeah, that's it.
So the final messages, I suppose, from the...
Maybe the response, relating to the elections. I think it probably won't affect, I think it won't probably affect the midterm elections, the higher tariffs, because it's too close already. We probably won't see the effect. But it might have an effect on the next presidential elections. You know, in politics, there's also the fundamental attribution error. Even though the higher tariffs was external, typically people blame the local politicians for what's happening. Diba? That's why Biden lost the elections. They say that they blamed him for the inflation, even though it was almost necessary because of the COVID pandemic and the boost that had to be done to the economy. So I think it can affect the next presidential elections if it results in higher inflation and low and higher unemployment, and the government is not able to address it. So they will probably blame the current administration for that, for what will happen.
Okay. For me, with the cognitive age, disinformation age, just check on the senatorial slate who leads, given the ICC conundrum and the power rivalry between U.S. and China. Whoever leads become the #1 senator in May will have an effect on who will become our president by 2028 and who will be the next president by 2034. And by that time, perhaps you would see that I don't know if Xi Jinping would still be the the president of China by the time. There's also a debate in the U.S. We know that there might be an extension also for Trump. So the world is changing so far. So what I'm trying to drive at here is that the world is volatile. Even how we see our midterm elections, it's very parochial, personalistic, and local politics do matter in terms of our foreign policy. It will change from time to time. That's how I see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cabalza. So I guess that concludes our Q&A. Let's give our speakers a warm round of applause. I turn you now over to our MC, Dr. Salvador, for the next phase.
Thank you very much. So as we conclude today's discussion, we would like to invite our two distinguished guests to share their reflections. First, we have Ambassador Antonio Basilio, Chair of the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council. Please, Ambassador, can you please come here? And then next, we will hear from Mr. Alan Severino, fourth-year BFA major in creative writing and a member of, he's the son of Howie Severino, a member of the Severino family, and son of his mother. I put here. Okay. First.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Carlos P. Romulo Foundation, I would like to thank Ateneo University, Dr. Sarina, Dr. Mel, Dr. Alma, and other faculty members for organizing this very important and timely event. This is the fourth installment of the Severino lecture series, and we hope that we will continue our cooperation. I have some personal interest in this topic because I spent better part of my professional career in the Philippine Embassy in Washington, D.C., and so did Ambassador JV and Ambassador Severino, although not at the same time. Some of my involvement includes the negotiation for the 1983 extension of the U.S. bases agreement, and also the creation of the Trade and Investment Facilitation Agreement, or TIFA, in 1989. This is going to be, I think, significant in the days to come. Thank you to our distinguished panel of speakers for sharing your valuable insights. I had expected you to rail against what other commentators have said is an all-out assault on the liberal world order that we have been accustomed to, with the United States in the lead, promoting democracy and free enterprise, to now what we see, or what they see, as a United States that is isolationist, that is ultranationalistic, mercantilist, and transactional. But thanks to your sober appraisal, things don't seem to be too bad. I came away with the impression that one, it's too early to tell, and secondly, it's not too bad. We have our strong people-to-people relations to bank on. It seems that in terms of security, I think Peter Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, was just here, and he doubled down on their commitment to support the Philippines in its dispute with the U.S. Balikatan, of course, continues. In terms of the tariffs, we can see it as an advantage because at least in terms of the other ASEAN economies and the other economies in our region, we have the lowest reciprocal tariffs. But I suspect that this is part of the effort to leverage us into giving more concessions. And some of the long-term grievances of the U.S., for example, on their agricultural exports and the minimum access volume that we impose on them, on the restrictions to investments, and also on services, and the protection of intellectual property. I hope that that's what happens. Let me just share with you what's the others who are the other economies who are in the crosshairs of the Trump policies, particularly on tariffs. I am part of the APEC, particularly the APEC Business Advisory Council. The International Secretariat is based here in the Philippines, and I am the head of that secretariat. When we last met in Brisbane, everyone was very careful about what to say because they did not want to provoke. But now, the U.S. Seems to have given the message that a lot of what APEC stands for, the tariff liberalization, the removal of structural impediments to trade and investments, particularly in a world where supply chains are quite complicated, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, in terms of APEC's emphasis on supporting MSMEs, women, indigenous people, and the youth. Support for the WTO, which most APEC member economies and the United States before see as the manager of an open and non-discriminatory world trading system that has led us to prosperity from the end of World War II, and as the arbiter for dispute settlements. Now, the U.S. has already hobbled the dispute settlement mechanism of the World Trade Organization by refusing to support the appointment or election of members of the appellate body of the WTO. And they have also recently announced that they have paused funding for the WTO. So we in ABAC are concerned. It's going to be new dynamics, and I'm quite interested in what's going to happen when we next meet in Toronto in a couple of weeks' time. This is going to be followed by the meeting of APEC senior officials and trade ministers in Jeju, in Korea. And as for me personally, I'm going to the U.S. On Monday. Normally it would be a routine trip, but now I go with some trepidation. So thank you very much for your listening. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, members of the Ateneo community, friends, and family. My name is Alan Severino. I'm currently a senior studying creative writing here at Ateneo, and it is an honor to stand before you tonight, in this place where stories of history, of diplomacy, of ideas continue to be told. This lecture series, this gathering, is not just an exercise in reflection, but in continuity, in carrying forward a dialogue that my grandfather, Ambassador Rodolfo Severino, dedicated his life to fostering. Lola Rod walked these same paths once, before he walked into the world. He graduated from the Ateneo de Manila with honors, but also, perhaps more tellingly, with the Mullery Award for Literary Excellence, proof that his first love, before diplomacy, was language. Because when you think about it, diplomacy, at its very core, is another form of storytelling. It's finding the right words in the right order at the right moment. It's taking something impossibly complex, like territories in dispute, alliances in flux, nations engaging in tariff wars, and distilling it into something that people can hold in their hearts and minds. When I was 10, I asked Lola Rod at the dinner table about the Sabah dispute, not realizing that I had just requested a geopolitical masterclass from one of the world's leading experts. I remember him smiling before explaining it to me with the same clarity and conviction that he would have before an audience much like this one. Imagine that, being taught about territorial conflict over a greasy cheeseburger and being given, at that age, a glimpse into the deeper machinations of the world. That's the kind of person my grandfather was, as comfortable explaining complex matters to a third grader as he was to heads of state. In one essay he wrote, "The international system is not immutable. Nations create it, and nations can reshape it." I think about that often, the impermanence of something so grand while I come of age in a world that is unraveling and reconstituting itself all at once. I sit in classrooms where we debate the failures of diplomacy, the fractures in global systems, the slow erosion of civility. I scroll through headlines filled with wars and displacements, countries at odds, borders hardening, and yet I also see people insisting on hope, on connection. I see voices rising above the noise, people still reaching across divides and making an effort to do more, to be more. There are days I wonder what it means to be a young Filipino in such a turbulent world, to inherit a name synonymous with diplomacy when diplomacy itself feels like a fraying thread. There are days I wonder what it means to be a writer, when words are twisted, weaponized, and reduced to tools for manipulation. And on days like those, I return to my grandfather's words, and I remind myself that nothing is immutable. Not history, not systems, not us. The world is made and remade by the people who choose to shape it. My father, Howie Severino, stood on a platform like this one in nearby Escalar Hall to receive the Gawad Balagtas for lifetime literary achievement. In our family, the act of writing is not just a vocation, but an inheritance. I find myself carrying forward that inheritance now, on the verge of graduating as a creative writing major in the same university where my grandfather first discovered the weight of words. And so, this moment, this event, to me, is more than a ceremony. It is a continuation, a reminder that what we build with language outlives us. And for this, I'm grateful. To the Ateneo de Manila, to the professors and mentors who keep the flame of discourse alive, and to all of you who have lent your time and attention to this gathering. This lecture series is not merely about remembering the past, but ensuring that the conversation does not end. It is about looking forward, about carrying what has been built and shaping it into something new. And so, as we close tonight, I will leave you with the sentiment my father and my father's father have left with me. Nothing is immutable. Not history, nor are we. What comes next, what is written next, is entirely up to us. Thank you.
BFA is lucky, Alan. You should have been our student. Wow. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you very much, Ambassador Basilio. Now, to present the tokens of appreciation, may we please call the chairs of the two departments that are responsible for putting together this forum, Dr. Melay Abao and Dr. Noel de Guzman. The tokens of appreciation, please. Okay. We would like to call on Dr. Chester Cabalza. Thank you. May we please call Dr. Geoffrey Ducanes? And ASEC Levi Alcantara. I believe the next part of the program is a photo op. May you please call on the members of the faculty who are here, our dean. We would also like to call our friends from the Center for Migration Advocacy. And other faculty members of the School of Social Sciences.
Really?
Join you here.